sun over the mountain tops. You know I'll always come again. You know I love to spend my morning time like sunlight dancing on your skin. I've never gone so wrong as to tell you lies. What you've seen is what I've been. There is nothing I could hide from you. You see me better than I can.
Kissinger will be arriving here about an hour and a half from now.
We've got some more acid over here if you want to go ahead and drop it.
Wait. Is that okay?
Politics. Don't politic, don't vote.
What the heck is that? Oh my God, look at that. It's just moving really slowly.
Then this.
They could have had prior knowledge.
They could have had prior knowledge.
And it's easy to put a truck bomb, as we did it, as it happened in London, happened in Iraq or Israel on a weekly basis.
It's easy to put a truck bomb, as we did it, as it happened in London.
El Al, it's not just an airline, it's Israel.
El Al, it's not just an airline, it's Israel's front for its intelligence agencies. And the spy cables confirm it after years of allegations. In 2009, South African TV show Carte Blanche broadcast the claims of a former airline guard at Johannesburg Airport. He said he was working for Shin Bet, Israel's internal spy agency.
We pull the wool over everyone's eyes. We do exactly what we want. The local authorities do not know what we are doing.
Months later, South Africa deported an Israeli airline official. Little more detail was released, but a secret intelligence document confirms Garb's story.
They did carry firearms and had, according to them, diplomatic protection. They even had all access unrestricted at the airport. This gave them the advantage to gather information with regards to arrivals and departures to and from South Africa.
Another classified report says El Al has the privilege of not being searched at the restricted areas.
El Al officials are also allowed to travel freely with their weapons amongst the El Al passengers. One of the members of El Al has also been identified as a courier for the Mossad.
The broadcast triggered a meeting at South Africa's foreign ministry. Security representatives withdrew permission for the Israelis to carry weapons. Then, despite arguments, they also took away the El Al workers' diplomatic immunity. A separate document relates counterintelligence information the South Africans have gathered. It says the El Al manager at Johannesburg International Airport is very involved in the gathering of intelligence and handled the issue of a pipe bomb at an Israeli company in 2001. El Al refused numerous attempts by Al Jazeera to seek comment. The carte blanche broadcast also got other intelligence agencies worried. Canadian spies contacted South Africa and asked for details on how Shin Bet was using El Al, not just as an airline, but also as a front. Clayton Swisher, Al Jazeera.
Overseas now to the intensifying manhunt for the son of Osama bin Laden. The State Department issuing a $1 million reward for information leading to his capture. ABC foreign correspondent Jennifer Eccleston reports from London.
Tonight, the hunt for Hamza bin Laden, the son of Osama bin Laden, intensifies amid fears the new face of Al-Qaeda is a rapidly growing threat. The State Department offering a $1 million reward for help tracking him down. And now Saudi Arabia announcing Hamza's citizenship revoked, leaving the young bin Laden without a home base. His exact location unclear.
I can feel it coming in the air tonight. Oh Lord, and I've been waiting for this moment for all
This is Greg McCarran.
And this is Jeremy Rothkushel.
I'd like to start out this week, this show, take a couple minutes to talk about this incident in West Virginia with this poster equating Congresswoman Ilhan Omar with the attacks of September 11th. I guess it's basically saying that a combination of the fact that she's a Muslim and I guess maybe the policies that she promotes as far as certain issues related to war on terror or being anti-war, maybe at least publicly speaking out and grilling people like Elliot Abrams on their criminality, I guess makes her accomplice of the broader radical Islam plot to destroy the West via events like September 11th,
well,
I guess.
I think it's actually probably because of her public criticism of Israel. That's what I imagine, especially in terms of some of the people that are involved in this. And I guess what it says, it's like a poster that has a picture of the trade towers, and on that it says, "Never forget you said," and then underneath it has a caption of her image saying, "I am the proof that you have forgotten."
Okay. Well, I think, that's a good point you make, although I do think things like grilling Elliot Abrams probably just adds just more icing on that cake, but I think you're right, because those things are interconnected, we might talk about a little later on.
Good point.
But so anyway, in the midst of this, we've had the sergeant at arms of the state of West Virginia, Ann Lieberman, has resigned after she was alleged by another member of the Virginia state government to have said that all Muslims are terrorists. And I guess she's denying this by saying, well, not all Muslims are terrorists. That's what she claims, she said, as if that's somehow like an acceptable alternative.
Yeah, no, I wasn't saying all 1.3 billion Muslims worldwide are terrorists. I'm saying not all 1.3 billion Muslims worldwide are terrorists. Mainly, probably over 1 billion, but not necessarily. Could be 900 million.
Hey, you know what? There's rapists, there's drug smugglers, there's child traffickers, but there's some good people among them.
Yeah, not all Mexicans are rapists and drug smugglers. I'm not saying all Mexicans are rapists and drug smugglers.
Enough to get people into enough of a frenzy to want to build a wall to keep them out, though.
Oh, definitely that. Especially a wall that's apparently, I believe, the steel is going to be coming via some Russian oligarch-based steel company. Is it a Abramovich? No, it's what's his name? I forget. I'll look that up. But there's a lot of these Russian oligarchs that are tied into all this, and of course, the wall, whether it's a sort of Lockheed Martin, Boeing linked up to the wall, or whether it's Elbit Systems, Israeli military contractor hook up to the wall, or if it's Home Depot and all that scenario hooked up to the wall.
Yeah, Bernie Marcus, huge mega Zionist supporter of Trump. But anyway, going back to this poster here and the reactions to it and the resignation by the West Virginia Sergeant at Arms, I believe it was, Ann Lieberman is her name. And just thinking about this, I've only seen this for a couple of hours. I haven't really looked too much into this story yet, but I've seen a few responses. I've seen enough responses from people that we have come to identify as being of the left, who speak up against policies of Islamophobia, bigotry against Muslims, the targeting of the Islamic world since September 11th, things of that nature, and a lot of the policies of the war on terror. But I'm seeing once again that the narrative becomes about, this is racist, this is Islamophobic, this is bigoted, which I do think is true. But I think, though, much like so many other things, for pretty much everything in this broader war that's been waged for the last 16 plus years, 17 plus years now, 2019, all waged on this narrative of the attacks of September 11th and the imminent threat of radical Islamic terrorism, which has justified everything that the U.S. has done in that region of the world since September 11th. Once again, we're seeing where this is not on the table to be discussed by the proponents that are pushing back against things like Islamophobia and the treatment of Muslims, both in America and overseas. And so once again, I just see this as another instructive lesson into why honesty about what we know happened and who we know is not responsible at the highest levels for the September 11th attacks and other terrorist-style similar events, why this needs to be exposed and why this needs to be discussed, and the fact that it's not being discussed by those who are presenting themselves as the vanguards of resistance against things like Islamophobia and targeted bigotry towards the Muslim world and the Middle Eastern countries. Once again, this is another example of why this is so vitally important and remains so vitally important to this day, because it renders even the basis that this Ilhan Omar photo is framed upon entirely untrue. But we're not seeing people willing to take that step, unfortunately.
That's a good point, Greg. I mean, it's interesting to see like all this sort of like the progressive knee-jerk reaction, be like, oh, how anti-Islamic and potentially racist is this? Especially since it's a black woman who's the Muslim that's depicted as being related to those who allegedly attacked us on September 11th, and how quick they are to jump in and decry this racism. But really, if you really think about it in terms of the actual political effect of the actual anti-Semitic, let's call it, conspiracy theories that people actually believe, those progressives that line themselves up with, you know, the Bernie Sanders or the Amy Goodmans or, you know, whatever it may be, all the way up to like a Noam Chomsky or other aspects of the left, they're obviously, at some level, they actually believe in anti-Semitic conspiracy theory, which is that this idea of 19 young Muslim Arab men did September 11th, even though there is no hard evidence that that is the fact. And there's lots of hard physical scientific evidence that a whole nother set of political grouping of people were actually involved in the mass death and destruction on September 11th. The narrative of which, whether it's the sort of hard anti-Semitic racist narrative that's being shown in this poster depicting Ilhan Omar next to the trade towers, or if it's the soft racist anti-Semitic conspiracy theory of, oh, that's racist or anti-Semitic or anti-Muslim to depict that, but we still believe the anti-Semitic conspiracy theory that basically the entirety of the mass media and the progressive media and the alternative media puts front and center every single time that the war on terror is talked about. So yes, I think it shows once again that the racist, let's call it the racism, it goes very, very deep. Very, very deep, and it goes deep into the heart of the progressives. And we already know these types of things about the idea of progressives except for Palestine or progressives except for Israel. I encounter that phenomena a lot, and it's actually still surprising to certain people who might actually be real progressives when they start to see how it's in this area of Zionist politics and specific support for Israel, or even support for the war on terror, where certain people who are allegedly progressives around things of the sort of standard fare progressive domestic issues of anti-racism and the things like you know, more equality in economics or that kind of thing, they seem to blank out on this issue, on the issue of Israel and Zionist power politics. But it even goes beyond that, because I'd say even those progressives who are really progressives on Israel, let's say, and Palestinian rights, they still haven't dealt with the mass lie that they believe about September 11th, and how do they actually know what they think they know about who did it and why. So yeah, I mean, so I think this is very indicative of a much deeper issue here in this country and in the West more generally, around such things as September 11th and the ongoing 9/11 wars, the war on terror, all of that. And it is interesting that this woman, Ann Lieberman, who was the sergeant at arms of the House in the state legislature of West Virginia, and that she, on her Twitter page, it's at Boker Tov, and she describes herself as American period, Zionist period, Jew period. And when you go and look at the feed, it's, you know, Front Page Magazine and Palestinian Authority sentences U.S. citizen to life in prison, and Charlie Kirk. And so there's like a good combo here of like the standard fare of the Trump, what is these days the Trump right-wing politics, with a very heavy Zionist strain to it, I would say. And you see that she definitely supports the Stephen Miller approach to the wall and immigration, and you see later on in her Twitter feed things like a picture, a wonderful, beautiful, heroic, emotional picture of one Charles, what's his name, the neocon who just passed away, who worked for Fox News.
Yeah, Charles Krauthammer.
Charles Krauthammer. And she asked questions about like who invited Mark Lamont Hill to speak at the UN in the first place. So yeah, it goes on and on.
She doesn't ask why the evil liberal fake news, the anti-Israel CNN didn't have Mark Lamont Hill's back. Notice she didn't ask that question, you know. But also she is on her, according to her Facebook page, she was the West Virginia chairwoman of an organization called Jews Choose Trump.
So there you go. So this event, or this incident, really exposes the controlled narrative of the post 9/11 American politics, where you have these sort of like hardcore anti-Islamic, on the edge of racist aspects of what sort of poses as the Trump right, and then you have aspects of the sort of progressive anti-racist left, all holding the massively anti-Semitic and I would say racist conspiracy theory of 9/11 that has launched the wars that have destroyed the lives of hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of Semitic peoples and their nations, that they're sort of agreed in holding that larger narrative together. And so once again, the truth of 9/11 is really like the duty of any person who considers themselves anti-racist, and definitely any person who considers themselves patriotic.
Indeed so, and so this is, so once again a challenge, and so, I mean, we'll see how this is covered in the next couple of days. Maybe, maybe we'll be surprised, but we'll see what happens, but certainly it is time, I think, for people who are on the fence or who are not certain. I do think that more than ever, and increasingly, I think over time, if it's at all possible, I think even the big event of September 11th and the bigger narrative and the actual the meaning of it and what it symbolizes, what it continues to symbolize to this day, I argue that it becomes more important as time goes on.
I think you're right. I think it does. I think it grows in importance the century is almost a fifth over, and it's all been under the guise of this massive lie that has distributed the lives of millions, if not billions of people, really, if you think about what the architecture of the global war on terror and all of the cybersecurity and all the counterterrorism programs that are done under the guise of this so-called response to the war on terror, and how as we pointed out, that this does not only include the core of the West, but also very much includes China and the pretext of counterterrorism that's being used in China, and concentration camps of Muslims in China, and the cybersecurity and the tighter and tighter connection with the Israeli security sector, but then also in Russia. And Putin never blew the whistle on September 11th. He equated questioning September 11th with questioning the moon landing, I guess, and so this is very, very pervasive. This is globally pervasive. This destroys the whole mythos of the BRICS countries versus the US and the Israel, or of the multipolar world versus the unipolar desires of the Israel second neocons, the Bill Kristol types. So this is, everybody is on board globally at the highest power levels with this war on terror narrative that's based predominantly on the analysis and the interpretation of September 11th as some type of externalized attack that sort of got by all of the systems in the West, rather than as a Zionist-goaded Israeli military intelligence fixed point, U.S. elements at the highest levels involved, false flag operation that would be defined in U.S. law as Article 3, Section 3 treason, and globally would be considered a crime against humanity and a war crime against civilians, and then the escalation of the war crimes after the fact done under the name of that false narrative. So yes, it's increasingly important as we invest trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars and millions, if not billions, of humans, lives moving forward in this false narrative of terrorism as some kind of globalized problem, rather than a pretext, a globally treasonous pretext for committing humanity to a cyber control grid moving forward, along with aggressive warfare.
Great points. I couldn't have said it any better. And one more thing before we move on from this is that once again, this reminds us, this Ann Lieberman, she was the chairwoman of an organization, Jews Choose Trump. At least it was a West Virginia. I don't know if this was a specifically West Virginia-based organization or an organization that she was just a state representative of a bigger organization. But I think the name speaks volumes. Jews choose Trump, and this is as you were reading through her social media feed, you can see what she represents. She's very extremely Zionist, very much takes a hard line in terms of Israeli policies related to things like the Palestinians, and now with this whole terror record, whether or not she said all Muslims are terrorists or not, I mean, I think the comment is repugnant either way, and it shows a lot of what she's the kind of ideology and worldview that she professes to believe in. It shows that once again, where you find these people that have these most openly extreme, most openly bigoted, most openly, I would say, rhetoric that is really pushing this continued war that we've had going on, obviously before September 11th, but was really kicked into high gear, obviously, after the events of 9/11. More or less from a clash of civilizations narrative, is portraying this as the what they call the Judeo-Christian West, the democratic, the West versus the backwards, brown hordes from the Muslim world. It's these kind of people that are backing Trump for the most part, that are really pushing the most extreme of this rhetoric. And once again, this is and also in a lot of times this rhetoric, turns into actions for sure. And once again, we're seeing that this is another example of time and time again, it's the pro-Trump elements of this extreme right-wing, extreme Zionist mindset is most prevalent within these circles that are very supportive of President Trump.
Yes, and as you pointed out before, they're even outside of the mainstream of like the paleo-neocons, as we've termed them, and the Kagans and the Crystals, who never really fully racialized their or even made it really overtly into the clash of civilizations when they were helping architect the steps of the war on terror, and that this sort of more obviously extreme group does racialize it and does turn it very overtly into a clash of civilizations. But even like the sort of so-called Jews for Trump group that this Ann Lieberman woman is a part of is also obviously outside the mainstream of American Jews, in terms of the vast majority of American Jews obviously voted against Trump, which is used obviously as a narrative on the sort of anti-Jewish all aspects of the sort of white nationalists or alt-right, to basically say Trump is against the Jews because the majority of American Jews voted against him, or some simplistic narrative like that.
Yeah, Clinton had 20 campaign donors. 19 of the top 20 were Jews, but Goldman Sachs employees were told they would be fired if they supported Trump. Yeah, those kind of narratives.
But once again, this also then, I would say in a similar way, that if you were looking at more just sort of as a critique that we were doing of the sort of progressives, maybe their failure to actually deal with the actual racism and Islamic sentiments of the actual war on terror, 9/11 false narrative. It's also the case that the vast majority of American Jews, even those that are against this overt sort of clash of civilizations supremacism as put forth by some of these sort of Jews for Trump elements, are still very similar to the rest of the progressive sphere, or even liberal sphere. They also pretty much, at the very least, do not speak out against this 9/11 false narrative, and in many ways it looks like they support it. So it's interesting. So I think in a similar way, if we were just looking at it in a political fashion, that this exposes the contained left-right narrative, but also if we were just considering it in terms of the Jewish spectrum in the United States of America, it also exposes the controlled nature of the sides, the acceptable parameters of the spectrum.
Yeah, absolutely. It's totally very true. And so in this regard, I think this is a good launching pad now that we've had this conversation and brought up and emphasized that it is so much of very much of this minority of Jewish public opinion here in America that's extremely right-wing, extremely Zionist, in combination with a lot of in combination really aligning themselves with the wing of the conservative base here in the U.S., which has gotten behind Donald Trump, and that being the most prevalent examples of open bigotry and open bigoted sentiments towards Islam, and the pushing of this whole idea that we're not just fighting a war against terrorists, we're not fighting a war for democracy and liberal values, as like the Bill Kristol style neocons would put it. We're actually waging a war against Islam. It's a spiritual war. It's a it's a war that's the enemy. You see that most prevalently within this minority of American Jews, combined with elements of the larger Trump base in this country that are the foremost promoters and pushers of this. And this is, I think, a good segue into following up to what we discussed with and this example of what progressives miss when it comes to things like September 11th and hard truths, hard realities behind these events and the perpetuation.
Greg, before you go into that, can you just hold that thought and the transition for one moment? Because before I forget, I just wanted to fill in what a fact that I brought up before,
sure,
and clarify it about the wall and the steel of the wall and how that all fits into some of these other networks that we speak about. So here's from a Crooks and Liars article from December 23rd, 2018. Guess who is likely to profit if Trump gets his border wall? Russian steel. Trump's artistic, beautiful steel slats will probably not help the American steel industry, by Nicole Bell. And then it goes in there and shows how these specifically proposed spiked long steel slats that actually leave room between them. It looks like, when people point out you might be able to even slip drugs through there. This is coming from a very specific company. It also shows aspects of the steel price spiking in relationship to the 2016 presidential election and then the Trump steel tariffs. And then it goes down somewhere down here. It says the question must now be who will profit for all that steel. Well, if the past is predictive, it's the Russians. And I just want to read this very briefly, and then I'll pass it back to you to transition us forward, Greg. 4 days after his inauguration, Donald Trump signed a handful of executive memos to advance the Keystone XL pipeline and revive the U.S. steel industry. He invited builder TransCanada Corp to reapply for a permit denied by Barack Obama and ordered up fast-track rules forcing not only Keystone but also all new U.S. pipelines to be made from American steel. Quote, "From now on, we're going to be making pipeline in the United States," unquote, he said. Made in America Keystone was a stunt. Most of its pipes had already been manufactured, a fact that the White House grudgingly admitted when it exempted the project from any new Buy American rules a few months later. While some of Keystone's pipes were made in the U.S., at least a quarter of them came from a Russian steel company whose biggest shareholder is an oligarch and Trump family friend. The company Evraz, EVRAZ, North America, supplied Keystone from its steel plants in Canada and for years has lobbied in Washington against Trump-style protectionism. The oligarch who owns Evraz, Roman Abramovich, is a very close ally to Putin, owing much of his significant wealth to him and a personal friend to Trump and the Kushners. And there's more on that. We'll link to that story. I just wanted to make sure that I was correct on that fact, which I think I was. Roman Abramovich was the Russian oligarch tied to the steel company that was being put forth for not only the Keystone XL pipeline, some of the steel, but also for the what's being proposed for the wall at the southern border. So there you go.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. And I think we will be, I'm sure, most likely, we will be revisiting this topic again as, as the probable inevitability that at least some of this wall is going to end up getting built sometime this year. I'm sure we'll be revisiting this topic, but thank you for getting into that. And I would show that this is it almost seems like this is another area where you see this coming together, this confluence of converging of interests of the international mob-based figures, as well as Russian interests and the aspects of what could be perceived as Russian interest, as well as openly Israeli interest via the very Zionist, very pro-Trump Zionist media in the U.S. being some of the biggest mouthpieces and cheerleaders for the idea of a border wall. So it's interesting to see that converging once again there.
Yes, and I believe Abramovich was also tied in, I think, to the Genesis Prize, along with the Alpha Bank Mikhail Friedman guys, the so-called Jewish Nobel Prize that Natalie Portman rejected.
The winner of this year's, very honorable winner of this year's award was Robert Kraft, a very honorable man who engages in very honorable activities at these massage parlors approximately 20 minutes from Mar-a-Lago. So I don't know if there's anything to that. But.
With traffic sex slaves, apparently.
Yeah, right. So anyway, in moving along from this, what we've been discussing here, in our last show the show we did before we took a hiatus here for a few weeks, we closed out our last show. We were talking about beginning to revisit the topic of the Donald Trump presidency and the media, and we zeroed in on a story that was published in Politico in December of 2017 of this ABC News producer Chris Vlasto giving confidential campaign or election data to Trump deputy campaign head David Bossie from Citizens United. He was under Steve Bannon in the Trump campaign on the night of the election. And this information, which is not supposed to get out from the networks for a certain time in the evening on election night, was given to the Trump campaign ahead of time to one David Bossie, who shared the information with Trump and Jared Kushner, among others. And while it's unclear what exactly was done with this information, and that's the question, it'll be interesting to know what, if anything, was done with this information. So if there's anybody out there who maybe has the resources to kind of maybe do a little digging into something like that, that could be very interesting. But I think what this shows is that within this media, you said the media is so anti-Trump, it is all just in unanimous lockstep unison out to get Trump. What you see is that there are a lot of people like this Chris Vlasto in the media, and I don't know exactly what Chris Vlasto represents, but it is very interesting that he was the person who was the producer of the first TV segment that broke the Monica Lewinsky scandal, which of course was that was Matt Drudge's rise to fame when Newsweek actually sat on the story. Matt Drudge came to prominence and put the Monica Lewinsky story out there. And the first major ABC News story that broke this scandal was produced by this same Chris Vlasto who gave this campaign information to the Trump campaign. He also produced, I believe, the Monica Lewinsky Barbara Walters interview from around the same time, among other things. So you kind of described him, and we were talking about this in private, as a kind of a television drudge in some ways with the kind of stories he broke. And so I don't, once again, there's not a smoking gun as to what was done with this information, but when you see the convergence of interest as far as who stood to benefit from the breaking of the Lewinsky scandal and the fact that this man was just there to produce all of these segments, and then he's giving confidential campaign information or election night data to the Trump campaign before that information is supposed to be even in anybody's hands other than those who are producing the network content for the night's election coverage, giving it to David Bossie, who's very prominent within the Council for National Policy, vast right-wing conspiracy network of operatives and that targeted the Clintons in the 1990s. I do think it's very interesting, to say the least. And we also referred back to the New York Times Magazine story that we covered in 2017, breaking down the long-term relationship between Donald Trump and CNN head Jeff Zucker, going back to The Apprentice, and Jeff Zucker giving Donald Trump The Apprentice when he was head of NBC Universal, and just how Trump and Zucker have helped each other over the years. So we were going to use these two articles as a springboard into revisiting this topic of Donald Trump and the media. And before we move on, I'll let you throw in any further comments. I hope that wasn't too convoluted of an explanation on my part.
Oh, that's cool. I didn't realize we were going to deal with this topic, and so I didn't bring up some of the we were thinking about like looking at the sort of larger perspective of the media and Trump too, in terms of this idea of Trump as a wizard with words, and how this idea of polling actually plays into things like the idea of psychometrics and the usage of very highly tuned psychological, maybe warfare dynamics in terms of shaping the messaging surrounding not only people like Donald Trump, but also the messages that Donald Trump was putting forward at the time. And so I think maybe we could just touch on that real briefly, because I did want to bring up this connection to neuro-linguistic programming. And we've touched on it before, and I had made the assertion that there's an aspect of neuro-linguistic programming, aka NLP, that's tied into this psychological warfare terrain, including it directly into aspects of the national security apparatus. And it is very interesting that it was people like the cartoonist, the guy who does Scott Adams, right, who also was, I believe, was tied into Alex Jones at the time. But Scott Adams was who's able to sort of make the bridge amongst some of these very different kind of, like, I believe he even spoke with people like Sam Harris and Joe Rogan and people like that during this run-up to the election, or in the immediate aftermath of the 2016 election, that he was able to early on say Trump understands hypnosis at some level. At the very least, he understands this idea of convincing speech, of a wizardry, and Scott Adams has been trained in hypnosis, I believe, and also in neuro-linguistic programming. And he was explaining to the public, really, that Donald, I know you guys, you sort of liberals and progressives and stuff think that the American people are never going to fall for Donald Trump. He's obviously, a con man of some sort. But he's like, I'm telling you, he knows how to effectively communicate in a mass way in relationship to his understanding of powerful word imagery, build the wall, drain the swamp. And we've touched on this in many ways, and that these phrases look to have been manufactured in a certain way, where they create imagery in a person's mind in a very direct and powerful way of, this is something's going to get done, and I can see in my mind the image of what's going to get done. And it's very simple language of the 3 words: drain the swamp, build the wall. And so in the background here is this question of neuro-linguistic programming, I would say, especially since what we know now in terms of Cambridge Analytica, SEL, and more even of what we talked about last time in terms of the Psi group and the construction of mass social media, mind control operations, really, using black ops, specific technology at some level. That all of this was going on in the background, but on top of that is this mass media portrayal of these messages and of Trump himself, tied in to these very specific logistics of the sharing of polling data by certain journalists. But we also know that there's a question of Paul Manafort having shared certain polling data with I believe Kalimnik, maybe, and a Russian military intelligence former officer. So this is all going on in the background. So if you look at neuro-linguistic programming, it is very, very directly connected. For example, it's well recognized that neuro-linguistic programming was co-founded by Richard Bandler and John Grinder. And John Grinder, you can go on the his Wikipedia page, and his life and career, you can read. Grinder graduated from the University of San Francisco with a BA degree in psychology in the early 1960s. Grinder then entered the United States Army and served as a captain in the the U.S. Special Forces in Europe during the Cold War. Following this, he went on to work for a U.S. intelligence agency. In the late 1960s, he returned to college to study linguistics and received his PhD degree from the University of California, San Diego in 1971. Skipping down, in the early 1970s, Grinder worked in George A. Miller's laboratory at Rockefeller University. After receiving his doctorate, Grinder took a full-time position as an assistant professor in the linguistics faculty at the University of California, Santa Cruz. He engaged in undergraduate teaching, graduate teaching, and research. His research focused on Noam Chomsky's theories of transformational grammar, specializing in syntax and deletion phenomena. So there you go. So that's the background of one of the co-founders of neurolinguistic programming. He's U.S. Special Forces. He worked for a U.S. intelligence agency. Was that the DIA or the CIA? I don't know. But he's obviously he comes back out into the academy as an intelligence officer of some sort with the Special Forces background, working in the Cold War, and then goes on to create with Richard Bandler this neurolinguistic programming as a methodology for effective communications. So I just wanted to put that onto our antidote record in terms of the actual background of what's going on here, because people have recognized there's lots of different articles about it, about how Trump actually does use neurolinguistic programming. Even if you think about his prosperity gospel church that was headed by a 33rd degree Freemason. Do you remember the name?
I don't know if there's proof of it, but it's been alleged. Norman Vincent Peale was his name.
Yes, and I believe I went and found that it's recognized, by the Masons themselves that he is 33rd degree Freemason. Yeah.
Yeah, Norman Vincent Peale, I guess, could be, in a lot of ways, was a modern pioneer of so much of, like, the kind of what you see from today's televangelists that are out there, the kind of combination of word of faith and the idea that, God's going to grant you prosperity if you just believe and all this. And the funny part about that is when Trump had all of the evangelicals at the White House putting hands on him, it was all these very smarmy, very obvious, corrupt snake oil type prosperity gospel televangelists.
Yeah, and I think that prosperity gospel is very much hooked in to this whole idea of effective communication, such as neurolinguistic programming, the idea of the sort of magical words, the idea of where you can bootstrap yourself into a more divine reality, or if you're even talking about sort of a more secular approach to that, like The Secret or something like that, where you can bootstrap yourself in basically self-hypnosis of some sort to recreate your reality. And there's obviously effectiveness to these kind of techniques, or else they wouldn't be used. But in the background there, especially if you think about using them at a mass scale, whether it's in, as a prosperity gospel of some sort, or on up into a mass political agenda, program, campaign, you are talking about the idea of mass psychometrical manipulation.
Yes, indeed. And I'll say, I think when it comes to this topic, this is something that, as you said, I kind of steered the conversation in a way that maybe we weren't sure whether we were going to go down this path or not. But I guess I would wrap up this line of thinking that I'm glad that we're opening up this door to explore into another area that I think is directly related to so much of the other things we discussed. I guess what I would do is leave the door open to other people. If you have information on this, or if I would open up the door to people in our audience. If you know more about this, feel free to send us links or sources that could increase our understanding of these kind of things. I do think it's very important. I certainly think there's definitely a place to discuss it, and it has as much credence or validity to it, importance to it, I think, as many of the other things we discussed, because I think they're all interrelated. So.
Yes, I completely agree, and I think we will. Let's explore this some more down the road, and even begin to consider even how this links into things like hypernormalisation and Vladimir Surkov and all of that aspect, and how that is connected deeply into this larger 21st century sphere of thinking about mass mind control, the politics as theater. It is very interesting that even in the domestically in the U.S. as this sort of neuro-linguistic programming, generative grammar, that basis potentially for the intelligence agencies and communities to use that to shape their own narrative. Then we also have the whole question of the Cambridge Analytica and the psi groups in play. But then on back to things like Surkov and even the Gerasimov so-called doctrine is put forth as this idea of hybrid warfare, where the idea of warfare includes in this in a necessary fashion the idea of information warfare. And that if you go look at that whole documentary of hypernormalization, that's part of the way that Putin has maintained his power, and not only in a sort of in a foreign policy fashion in terms of the so-called Gerasimov doctrine of using hybrid nonlinear warfare, the combination of military operations with information warfare abroad, but the Surkov doctrine directly there in a domestic fashion of where the politics, the dissent politics in Russia is created in a theatrical fashion in a way that becomes very obvious once you begin to look at it. And I think that then helps us begin to understand our own domestic situation in the United States, not just because of the potential long history of Russian then Soviet influence in our domestic politics in some way, but also in terms of the way that politics and dissent and counter gangs and all of that we've spoken about a lot is managed in many ways, and even the idea of just the creation of the discourse, just as we started out with thinking about these from left to right or right to left when looking at this Ilhan Omar incident in West Virginia. The whole thing is framed in a controlled fashion where both of the so-called sides are framed up in a way that suits the powers that be.
Yes, great point. And well, I think definitely open to looking down into this particular subject in the future for sure. So once again, we leave the door open for further information and research if other people have things that they want to send our direction that could increase our understanding of these topics, and please feel free to. And we've got about another 13-14 minutes left to go here. I want to close out by talking about the recent appointment in Venezuela of as I guess I don't know exactly what his role would be in this entire drama playing out in Venezuela with the Maduro government and the U.S. Endorsed new head of the Venezuelan government, Juan Guaido, but Elliot Abrams of the 1980s neocon Latin America dirty wars infamy was appointed, I believe, the special envoy to Venezuela. And this, honestly, with the topic of Venezuela, my belief is that so many people have been discussing it. It's very much, I think there's a lot of people that are doing great work in terms of discussing the situation in Venezuela. And so we haven't really gotten into it too much here. But I think with this particular relation to Elliot Abrams, we were kind of looking at this as a continuation of policies that went on in the in the 1980s with these various dirty wars against left-wing movements in Latin America that obviously the U.S. and also Israel had a very heavy hand and involvement in. And Elliot Abrams has been identified as the kind of the go-to guy for dirty war operations, covert operations that were taking place in Guatemala. And from what we've been stumbling upon here in the last few hours, just talking among ourselves, we've found some very important information that really lays out Guatemala as an important epicenter of not just what was going on in Latin America, but on more of a global perspective related to things we've discussed in the past, like Robert Maxwell and these spy networks and this transferring of this promised software with this crucial data and information that was given to transferring of to Israeli and ultimately into Soviet hands. And so, Jeremy, I guess let's wrap up by talking about this.
Yes, and of course there's also an Ilhan Omar connection to this, as she was the congresswoman who really grilled Elliot Abrams the most when he came and testified to Congress in a very, pretty intense fashion that made Elliot Abrams want to respond in the moment. So I think you were right, thinking back to the beginning, that a portion of why Ilhan Omar is being targeted is not just because of her criticism of Israel, but also because of her apparent holding to account of the aggressive warfare, the undermining of countries in relationship to this, especially around these sort of neocons of the 80s and the Iran-Contra affair.
But I think what we're about to talk about here very much is, in a lot of ways, is directly related to the same topic of Israel. So.
Yes, and a good point. And before I forget, I just want to point out that in this realm of this deeper background of Promise software, Robert Maxwell, and how it fits into this whole domain, some sources people might want to go look at is Jalil Al-Askari's YouTube channel. He's putting out incredible resources and sort of source video material about a lot of this stuff and a lot more on his YouTube channel. Go check that out. And then, of course, going back to John Swin's the site The World Needs This Man, he's put up a lot of different essays that probe these topics and more. And then also, if you want to go to Medium, Jeff Buckley, as we might call him, is still putting up very interesting essays surrounding all of this. So those are some resources to go check on. But now I want to go to a resource that might get me in further trouble with Brendan O'Connell. But I think it's very, very interesting, and I think we should put it on the table nonetheless, even if we have a critical eye to the source. And this points to what you alluded to, Greg, about how this deep background of Elliot Abrams in the 80s, specifically in Guatemala, or even the larger Iran-Contra so-called scandal in the midst of Cold War politics in the so-called New World, really does. There's the piece, the participation of Israel in all of this is at the core and is way more substantial than it's almost ever given any attention to. And we've talked about before that the Iran-Contra scandal really should be, Israel should be in the epicenter of that, and we've already pointed out why the way that people like Michael Ladin are playing a key role there as intermediaries, especially in relationship to amongst the Israelis, the Iranians, and the Americans and the CIA. But even on the Ladins, of course, Ladin plays a role in the architecture, the global architecture of the fraud that led to the aggressive war on Iraq. And we've put some of that on the table about how even the CIA was apparently sidestepped in meetings in Italy that brought Israeli intelligence to the table with their apparently manufactured intelligence to basically help provoke an aggressive war against Iraq. So that's all in the background here. But there's a very interesting I believe this is it's called mailstar.net/bugs. It's called Bugged Computer Software by Ari Ben Menashe, and this is why it's going to get me in trouble with Brendan O'Connell, because he was already frustrated with me for bringing up a journalist called Jovials in the context of the Bali bombing, and Brendan says that Jovials is known to be Ari Ben Menashe, who's just an Israeli disinformationist. But I think it's a little more complex than that, and Ari Ben Menashe might be putting out some disinformation. But similarly to the Mossad whistleblower Ostrovsky, there is a lot of reality here. And so in the midst of this, it's called Ari Ben Menashe, Prophets of War, the Sensational Story of the Worldwide Arms Conspiracy. And I believe that's a book that Ari Ben Menashe printed in 1992. So I'm just going to read a little bit of this and then get into the sections that really focus on Guatemala and why that might be related to what's going on right now in relationship to Elliot Abrams and Venezuela and the Trump administration. Okay, the author Ari Ben Menashe was an Israeli intelligence officer. Raphael Eitan was a counterterrorism advisor to Menachem Begin. This book broke the Iran-Contra scandal but was ignored by the media. It also describes the capture of Mordechai Vanunu, beginning with his approaching the Sydney Morning Herald about his secret photos. That newspaper, instead of scooping the story, contacted ASIO, Australia's equivalent of the CIA. Ari Ben Menashe is lucky to be alive. The extracts below describe the development of bugged computer software and how Israel helped to bring down the USSR with it. And that's an interesting aside there, is if we hook up some of the information we know from the Robert Maxwell side and how Maxwell was working not only with the Israelis but also top elements of the KGB, that it was not as simple to say to help bring down the USSR. Maybe more appropriate to say to reformat the USSR more globally, because that's what Maxwell was involved with, was setting up a more global financial architecture for some of the highest levels of the KGB for when the so-called fall happened, to be able to distribute billions and billions, dozens of billions of dollars, including the idea of how to then sort of wash things and connect it to ongoing black ops is what it really looks like. Okay, back to this article. Page 129. So it looks like it's actually just sort of making notes about the Ben Menashe book. One of Eitan's pet projects was an anti-terrorist scheme involving a sinister Big Brother-like computer program named PROMIS. It was through Eitan that I became involved in it. This was not joint committee work per se, but many of the same people who worked on our arms to Iran operation worked on PROMIS also. The most prominent of these was British media baron Robert Maxwell, who made a fortune out of it. Through some of his companies, the Israelis and the Americans were eventually able to tap into the secrets of numerous intelligence networks around the world, including Britain, Canada, Australia, and many others, and set into motion the arrest, torture, and murder of thousands of innocent people in the name of, quote, anti-terrorism, unquote. Okay, so then it goes through all this whole background that people, other than us, like John Swin and Jaleel and others have gone into much more deeply. But then if you then search for Guatemala in the midst of this article, you really begin to see what was going on there. And so I'm going to read a little bit from that section. Okay. So his Trans-K operations were another casualty. And Trans-K, by the way, refers to South Africa operations. And then along came Maxwell, who, knowing exactly what he was buying it for, sank his money into DGEM. And DGEM, by the way, is a... I'm gonna go back up and read from a note from page 136. It said, a perfect company for Maxwell to take over already existed. Israeli-owned DGEM was a computer business located in Israel, Guatemala, and Trans-K, the Bantustan quote-unquote homeland controlled by South Africa. The Trans-K connection is particularly interesting. Menachem Begin, Israel's prime minister from 1977 to 1983, had a longtime friend, Yaakov Meridor, who was running various businesses with South Africa through Trans-K. A minister without portfolio in Begin's government, he was raking in a fortune in commissions from whatever country wanted to beat the boycott on South Africa by dealing through Trans-K. Everything had to go through Meridor or a company he owned. One of these companies was DGEM, which was actually controlled by Israel's military intelligence and was providing computer services to the South Africans and to Guatemala. Okay? Poor Meridor became unstuck and opened the door for Maxwell when he was caught up in a huge scandal, along with a Texan, Joe Peoples, and a Romanian expatriate who claimed to be an energy professor. Meridor drew up a blueprint for using the sun as a source of energy to generate vast amounts of electricity. Although this was theoretically feasible, the Meridor blueprint went far beyond the realm of possibility. However, he and his pals succeeded in selling the idea to the wealthy Hunt brothers of Texas for $2 million. Alright, so that's interesting too. So that there are the Hunt brothers, right, who are tied very much into the CNP, right, Greg?
Yes, indeed.
Okay, I'm going to keep going with this. Let's see if we can get a little bit more before the end of the show. After the initial success with PROMIS against the Jordanians and following Maxwell's agreement to buy into DrEaM, PROMIS was put to use in the most horrible way in a number of countries. One egregious example was Guatemala. Pesach Ben-Or, a representative for Eagle, a well-connected Israeli arms-dealing company, had been helping the military regime there set up a computer tracking system to fight the leftist insurgency, but it proved to be inadequate. In 1984, Israeli intelligence came to an arrangement with the man who was calling himself El Jefe de la Nación, the chief of the nation, General Oscar Mejia Victores. He agreed to allow a warehouse to be used for storing weapons coming secretly out of the U.S. en route to Iran, and to allow planes carrying arms from Poland to the Sandinista government in Nicaragua to fly over Guatemala and even land there on occasions. The Israelis, with a wink and a nod from the Americans, had been selling certain arms from Poland to the Sandinistas in their fight against the Contras. Of course, there were other factions in the U.S. and Israel, including the Oliver North Group, who supplied weapons to the Contras. The price Israel had to pay for this agreement was that the Eagle Company, run by Pesach Ben-Or in Guatemala and his associate Mike Harari in Panama, by the way, Mike Harari, who supposedly, allegedly confessed to helping architect September 11th, to the alleged former Soviet nuclear intelligence officer Dmitry Kalasov while they were in Thailand just the day after September 11th. But back to the text. And overseen by Ariel Sharon, would continue selling weapons to the Guatemalan government. On top of that, Israel would install a very sophisticated computer program that would help the military stamp out insurgents. The Mossad chief in Israel, Nahum Admoni, told Sharon not to interfere with the computer program, and in turn the intelligence community would not interrupt Eagle's unofficial sale of arms to the Guatemalan military. It was a case of everyone scratching everyone else's backs. In setting up PROMIS in Guatemala, Israel employed the services of Manfred Hermann, a German expatriate in his 60s who owned an automobile spare parts company in Guatemala City known as Cedra. It was agreed that Hermann would represent Israel's arms-running company Aura in Guatemala, while his partner Baldur K. Klein would be the representative in Maitland, Florida, from where he would coordinate all our activities in Central America. Shortly after Maxwell took over DrEaM, Rafi Eitan asked Earl Bryan to meet Klein in Maitland and give him PROMIS with the trapdoor in place. So for PROMIS to work, I'm skipping ahead, for PROMIS to work, everything in the water company and the electric company had to be computerized. Not only that, lists of identification numbers would have to be updated and a new census conducted. With so much information then available and with suspicious characters going into a central computer, Israel and the U.S. would be able to break into the central system and learn everything the Guatemalan government knew. Israel turned to Honeywell, the Israeli franchise of which was owned by Medan Computers Limited. All the technicians working for Medan were military intelligence reservists and experts on computer. Those at the top were made aware of the PROMIS program, although they did not know about the trapdoor. When Medan pointed out that their computers would not be suitable, we arranged for them to act as brokers for IBM equipment in Guatemala. So we're running out of time, but really there you go. So the Israelis and this PROMIS and the military intelligence of the trapdoors were right in the middle of the dirty wars in Central America and helped set up assassination lists. So we're out of time, but until next week, Antidote, we out.
All right. Thanks.
The invasion in 2003 was supposed to remove an oppressive dictator and replace him with a stable democracy. 13 years on, Iraq is a country fragmenting, consumed by violence and run by sectarian militias. This is the story of how that came about. Baghdad in flames at night. Not shock nor 2003, but July 2016. Last weekend, Islamic State bombs a busy shopping area. 250 people are dead. Chilcott speaks of an intervention that went badly wrong, with consequences to this day. In Baghdad this evening, at the site of the explosion, people gave their reaction.
March 2003. Shock and awe.
At this hour, American and coalition forces are in the early stages of military operations to disarm Iraq, to free its people, and to defend the world from grave danger.
The air and ground invasions went quickly. Baghdad fell in 3 weeks, and the hunt for Saddam Hussein was on. May 1st, aboard the USS Abraham Lincoln.
Major combat operations in Iraq have ended.
Ladies and gentlemen, we got him.
2003 ended with Saddam in custody. But the new year brought signs of trouble in Iraq. John Nagel was there in the war's early days. Looking back, the problem was clear.
We were very well prepared to topple Saddam's government, but not well prepared for what came after.
Violence literally exploded in places like Fallujah. The 2006 bombing of a Shia shrine in Samarra led to massive sectarian violence.
Iraq had essentially descended into civil war between the Sunnis and the Shia.
So America will change our strategy,
sending 30,000 more troops and a new commander.
The situation in Iraq is dire. The stakes are high.
The surge infuriated some lawmakers and divided the nation.
And the president says the way to dig out of this hole is to dig deeper. Does that make sense?
The surge was among many pieces that led to violence falling in Baghdad and then elsewhere around Iran. Amid absurd moments, relative stability emerged, though there was still fighting. The U.S. combat mission ended in August 2010. Iraqi troops were in charge of securing their own country with help. But come 2012...
And unlike the years of the past, they won't be able to count on the enablers, as we call them, that the American forces have provided.
There were controversies during America's 8.5-year presence in Iraq, including the Abu Ghraib prison abuses. The war also allowed Iraq to have a post-Saddam government, a democratic one.
A historic vote. These soldiers lined up to hand in their ballots on Wednesday. They were among thousands of security personnel who voted early to avoid logistical nightmares.
I did my duty and I voted. God willing, I hope that those we voted for will keep their promises. We have great hopes that they will keep them, God willing.
A note of optimism that was once rare in this war-torn nation. But now, nearly 15 million Iraqis are eligible to vote in polls, which will take place in 14 out of 18 Iraqi provinces. Even Sunni Arabs are expected to turn out in force, a reversal of the last elections, which they boycotted.
We thought our country should be free before participating in elections.
Free of the U.S. That goal is within sight as President Barack Obama prepares to reduce troop numbers. For Washington, the elections are seen as a key test of Iraq's steadily improving stability. The run-up to the provincial elections has been relatively free of violence. But on Thursday, gunmen killed 3 candidates and 2 campaign workers, raising fresh questions about whether the country is ready to go it alone.
But it also left nearly 4,500 Americans dead. At
leaves the nation struggling to answer a question.
From my perspective, was it worth it is such an individual question. I think the more important question is, was it worthwhile? And the problem with trying to answer that, was it worthwhile, I don't think you can answer it today.
What the Iraqis do from here may well decide it. For now,
it's very hard to make an argument against the war.
Sagar Megani, Associated Press.
هذا التقرير كان من مصداقية الشعب في رأي باطلية دخول القوات الأمريكية والقوات البريطانية العراق. الإرث الوحيد الذي تركه القوات الأمريكية والقوات البريطانية بالعراق هو الدمار.
أدت إلى سفك الدماء العراقيين ودخول داعش في العراق وكثير من السلبيات التي لا تعد ولا تحصى، والله العالم ماذا زرعوا لنا في المستقبل، ماذا بعد داعش.
When the British Army went into Basra, they were welcomed. In the overwhelmingly Shia south, the removal of Saddam Hussein, who'd always favoured the Sunni minority, felt like a liberation. But in the vacuum left behind by de-Baathification, the full-scale dismantling of the Iraqi state, Shia clerics like Muqtada al-Sadr built large followings and powerful militias. Backed by Iran, they began to cause trouble for the British military. In September 2005, 2 men were stopped at a police checkpoint on the outskirts of Basra. They were SAS operatives dressed as Iraqi civilians. When they flashed their military IDs, there was a confrontation. They opened fire, killing an Iraqi officer. One of the men was Colin McLachlan. He told Newsnight how he and his comrade were dragged from their car.
We were taken into an outhouse at the side of the checkpoint. Slowly but surely they removed our clothes, body armour, weapons, mock executions, light beatings, interrogation, and then a chief police officer came in with red lapels, told us it was mistaken identity and they were going to take us back to the palace. Loaded us into 4 or 5 police 4x4s, and on the way back into where the palace was, they took a left instead of a right and went into the police station and took us in there.
The police had been infiltrated by the militia. The British military, powerless to get the men released, stormed the police station. In the aftermath, angry crowds surrounded a British armoured personnel carrier. These images shocked a nation that thought it was winning hearts and minds. As Chilcot identified, the militia, not the British Army, had become the dominant force in Basra. This event was a turning point, certainly in the public perception of Britain's role in Basra. It was the point at which many people realised that softly, softly simply wasn't working. And in the ensuing battle between the British military and the Iranian-backed Shia militias, it was the militias that would eventually prevail. 2 years later, the Brits cut a deal with the militia to pull back from the city. It was, in effect, a surrender. Chilcot called it humiliating. From then until their official withdrawal from Iraq, the British Army was, in effect, confined to barracks at its compound near the airport. As Chilcot makes clear, American planning for the post-invasion phase was similarly inadequate. They faced an insurgency in the west, led by a coalition of Al-Qaeda and Sunni tribes that soon spread to other parts of Iraq. In 2006, a massive bombing in Samarra at one of the holiest Shia shrines sparked a sectarian civil war. By the summer of that year, 100 people were being murdered every day.
I got back to Iraq at the beginning of 2007, and every morning there'd be dead bodies found in the streets. And you could tell what sect they were by the way they'd been murdered, whether they'd been drilled through the head or whether there was a bullet there. There were so many dead bodies in the river, washed up. that people stopped eating fish. They said the fish started to taste differently because they'd just been living off bodies.
Then came the surge. The United States deployed an extra 30,000 soldiers. Sunni tribes joined the Americans in the fight against Al-Qaeda. It worked. US troop deaths declined, so too did civilian killings. Emma Skye witnessed it firsthand as aide to General Ray Odierno, America's top commander in Iraq.
I really felt, and everybody really felt, that the war had been won. And by 2009, the violence in Iraq had dropped dramatically. And everybody in Iraq thought the civil war was behind them. Iraqis had changed their strategic calculus. It wasn't that all the bad guys had been killed, but they actually decided that they could achieve what they wanted through politics rather than through violence.
But in the end, it was politics that was to be Iraq's undoing. In March 2010, there were parliamentary elections. The results were close. The Prime Minister, Nouri al-Maliki, and his coalition of Shia parties won 2 seats fewer than a secular coalition, which had garnered support from the Sunni community. Neither had enough seats to govern on their own. Iran saw its chance and seized the initiative. Behind the scenes, the Americans were trying to negotiate a way out of the political deadlock, but so too were the Iranians. And it was eventually Iran who managed to broker a deal that would see Nouri al-Maliki, their favoured candidate, keep the presidency. In return, Maliki would demand a complete withdrawal of American forces.
So Maliki got his second term thanks to the Iranians. When he was secure in his seat for the second term, the first thing he did was go after the Sunni politicians. He accused them of terrorism and drove them out of the political process. He reneged on the promises that he had made to the Sunni tribes, the Sunni awakening, that had fought against Al-Qaeda in Iraq with the support of the US forces. And he arrested Sunnis en masse. And in such an environment, the Islamic State was able to rise up out of the ashes of Al-Qaeda in Iraq and present itself as a defender of the Sunnis against the Iranian-backed sectarian regime of Nouri al-Maliki.
Let's cross over to Ontario and talk to human rights attorney Mr. Edward Corrigan. Thank you so much for being with us. Well, the situation dealing with the ISIL terrorists just continues to spiral out of control, and now we're seeing that more and more Westerners are actually also involved in this. We see now the United States and the UK and other Western governments actually condemning the terrorists for their actions. Question though, sir, do you think that they would have even gotten this far if it hadn't been for the situation in Syria and basically the propping up of these kind of groups by Western governments?
Well, I agree with that. I think that the whole ISIL and ISIS were generated by the West. The Americans, the British, the Israelis have all been supporting them with arms and money. They've also gotten money from some Western client states like Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and Qatar. But the original foundation is simply from British intelligence. According to documents supposedly released by Edward Snowden, that al-Baghdadi, who was supposed to be the head of ISIL, he was trained by the Mossad for a year and may in fact be a Mossad agent, and that he is trying to, I guess, organize Islamic fundamentalists and radicals to destroy the secular national Arab state of Syria. And they've expanded into Iraq. But you've got the American government, the British government, the Israelis supporting the Islamic fundamentalists in Syria, ISIL, giving them weapons, arms. And then at the same time, they're attacking them now because they're posing a threat to the American client state in Iraq. So you're arming them in Syria, and then you are attacking the same people in Iraq. I think that's my definition of insanity. You can't have it both ways. But the other thing is, according to the documents released by Robert Snowden, that this is sort of like a honey trap where they want to gather all of the Islamic radicals and militants in one place. They control them, use them for their own purposes, but also maybe in the end destroy them. And especially if you're getting Islamic militants coming from the United States, Britain, other countries, the person who executed the gentleman in Iraq, he had a British accent. So you are concentrating them there and using them to destroy Syria, obviously, but now they're posing a threat to Iraq, and they're talking about attacking Saudi Arabia and other feudal countries or Arab states in the Arab Gulf region. So it's a very dangerous game. It's a crazy game. And, you know, the ISIL supposedly executed 2,000 Yazidis. They're fighting the Iraqi government. They're fighting the Kurds. You know, the whole thing is just, it's chaos and destruction. And out of that, supposedly some people think they can get some sort of, political or economic benefit. But it really is a crazy policy that doesn't make any sense unless your idea is to destroy the whole region. Well, it's happened repeatedly. I think part of it is this arrogance of some of the CIA, British and Israeli planners, because they think they control the situation.
Today, Islamic State is in retreat, pushed out of cities like Fallujah by a coalition of Iraqi military, Shia militias, and Sunni fighters who have again turned against the jihadists. They're backed by US and British air power, but on the ground, it is the divisive Shia militias that hold sway. In the battle-scarred towns of Anbar, Sunni civilians are subjected to revenge attacks, and as the bombings last weekend showed, Islamic State's capacity to kill remains undimmed. As the Americans withdrew the last of their troops in 2011, one man told me, Iraq is becoming a place where other countries come to settle their scores. Nearly 5 years later, that is exactly what has come to pass.
But in Russia, there was a group of men who had seen how this very lack of belief in politics and dark uncertainty about the future could work to their advantage. What they had done was turn politics into a strange theatre, where nobody knew what was true or what was fake any longer. They were called political technologists, and they were the key figures behind President Putin. They had kept him in power, unchallenged, for 15 years. Some of them had been dissidents back in the 1970s, and had been powerfully influenced by the science fiction writings of the Strugatsky brothers. 20 years later, when Russia fell apart after the end of communism, they rose up and took control of the media. And they used it to manipulate the electorate on a vast scale. For them, reality was just something that could be manipulated and shaped into anything you wanted it to be. But then a technologist emerged who went much further, and his ideas would become central to Putin's grip on power. He was called Vladislav Surkov. Surkov came originally from the theatre world, and those who have studied his career say that what he did was take avant-garde ideas from the theatre and bring them into the heart of politics. Surkov's aim was not just to manipulate people, but to go deeper and play with and undermine their very perception of the world, so they are never sure what is really happening. Surkov turned Russian politics into a bewildering, constantly changing piece of theatre. He used Kremlin money to sponsor all kinds of groups, from mass anti-fascist youth organisations to the very opposite, neo-Nazi skinheads. And liberal human rights groups who then attacked the government. Surkov even backed whole political parties that were opposed to President Putin. But the key thing was that Surkov then let it be known that this was what he was doing, which meant that no one was sure what was real or what was fake in modern Russia. As one journalist put it, it's a strategy of power that keeps any opposition constantly confused. A ceaseless shapeshifting that is unstoppable because it is indefinable. Meanwhile, real power was elsewhere. hidden away behind the stage, exercised without anyone seeing. And then, the same thing seemed to start happening in the West. By now, it was becoming ever more clear that the system had deep flaws. Every month, there were new revelations of most of the bank's involvement in global corruption, of massive tax avoidance by all the major corporations, of the secret surveillance of everyone's emails by the National Security Agency. Yet no one was prosecuted, except for a few people at the lowest levels. And behind it all, the massive inequality kept on growing. Yet the structure of power remained the same. Nothing ever changed, because nothing could be allowed to destabilize the system. But then, the shape-shifting began.
Thank you very much. So nice. So amazing. So amazing. What? That's okay. I love you more, okay?
Shemi Tzur, Israel's ambassador to New Zealand, dismissed a science fiction report suggesting Israelis caught up in the February earthquake were Mossad agents. New Zealand Prime Minister John Key confirmed an investigation was underway by the SIS, but said there was no evidence the Israelis were intelligence agents. On Tuesday, the Southland Times alleged that Ofer Mizrahi, killed in the Christchurch quake, and his 3 friends were Mossad agents. The newspaper claimed the country's security services were investigating the suspicious behavior of the Israelis, noting Mizrahi's friends made a hasty departure following the earthquake. Tzur countered the claim, calling it upsetting, saying he drove the Israelis to the airport as they were keen to return home. He also denied the allegations, claiming Mizrahi had in his possession 5 or 6 passports, noting many Israelis have dual citizenship. These were youngsters holidaying in your beautiful country. We encourage our young people to visit New Zealand,
Well,
Tzur said.
I just read Elon Olberg, what's her name? Omar, D. Minnesota. I read her comments, so I like to read her comments back to her and just change a few words, because I feel I think she's intelligent, and I'd like to speak her own words to her. Islamophobia is real, and I am grateful for Muslim allies and colleagues who are educating me on the painful history of Islamophobic tropes. My intention is never to offend my constituents or Arab Americans or Muslim Americans as a whole. We have to be willing to step back and think through criticism, just as I expect people to hear me when others attack me for my identity. This is why I unequivocally apologize. At the same time, I reaffirm the problematic role of lobbyists in our politics, whether it be CARE, the Muslim Brotherhood, or the fossil fuel industry. It's gone on too long, and we must be willing to address it.
Yeah, I got messed up. I was doing cocaine up till March 2nd of this year. Of course, if they release this next spring, it's going to sound great. This comes out in April. They go, he's been off coke for 3 weeks. But, yeah. So I better say March 2nd, 1990, I stopped doing coke because I didn't know it was illegal. Thank you. Thank you for you that believe me. Thank you very much. For you that don't believe me, eat me. I'm alive, all right? Now, basically what was happening is I was doing little bits of it, but I would show up at parties. And because you're in the limelight, because you're a celebrity and you look like you're a party animal, people assume you can do supernatural amounts of narcotics, of drugs. So I go to these little parties, right? And everybody else's line is like about an inch long. It's like, hey man, we're doing coke, buddy. You know, little inch line long. I come in and go, oh, it's Dennison! Oh, here's your line! You know, it's like 2 feet long. There's rocks in it you could put in your driveway. It's not chopped up. I don't get a straw. I get a piece of a garden hose. Because I want to make sure it all goes through. Here, go, man, go, 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 you know. So I'm trying to be like, I'm trying to live up to the image. Oh, get out of my way, watch me. Ah! And I would sniff all this shit up. About 2 minutes later, I'm walking around the party going, hey, man, have you got any shoe polish or something I can drink to slow this down? You think shoe polish will kill you? I need something, man. There's nothing left to drink? I wish you'd have told me that before I did this 2-foot-long line. You fuck. All right. Well, listen, you guys keep partying. I'm going to go ahead and lay down and beg God to live for a while, all right? I'm just going to go ahead and lay down. You guys keep rocking, man. And so then you lay down, and you grab your heart, and you make all those promises. I'll never do it again. I promise, God, just make it stop. Just make it stop, please. Just make it slow down. I'll never do it again until I feel better. I swear to God, until I feel better, I'll never do it again. I promise. And I had enough of those fucking nights, and we lost a lot of good people to that shit, and I just think if you're involved with it, get disinvolved with it, because you're just going to get busted or you're going to get sick and die. So that's all I got to say about that.
Boy, that evil inclination, it's something, isn't it? Boy, it'd be good if you could figure out how to do an exorcism and get it out of you, out of your head. Wouldn't that be cool if you could get rid of the thoughts you don't really want to think or repeat, that you know aren't true, that you're just saying out of fear or out of just being dumb? I'm praying a lot for dumb people right now because, you know, you can always get smarter. You don't have to stay dumb. You don't have to stay an idiot. You can actually increase your intelligence and awareness with fact. I'm just holding out that you could do that and praying for you to do it. Fact. It really matters. It's all that matters. Fact is truth.
She can be your bestest friend in the beginning, but yo, that's just the end. In my neighborhood, guns and drugs, but the #1 dope, yo, among the thugs is my new car's Miracle Whip, and she's the same color boy as that pot of shit. Baby girl, I'm glad you made it. Moved up from the weed and you graduated too. Miami is where it's good, but the models really like me in Hollywood. All users' nose get numb, and all the dealers where you get your re-up from. Player don't spread the word, but the homie right there, he supplied the birds. And the homie, he can work a stove. It's a free base hubba thing, and it's she can be in every state, on a coffee table mirror or just a plate. In court for a Potter case, and your lawyer got Potter all over his face. The girl's bathroom is cold, every stall got 2 bitches doing they nose. I knew a cat who couldn't paint the least, but the way he moved coke was a masterpiece. One line at a beautiful time, then you watch her get ugly on a beautiful mind. Bill Mo with the town of coke, and we only 8 miles from the city of dope. Ticket to ride, White Line Highway, tell all your friends they can go my way. My homie said he can work a stove, it's a free base hubba thing, and it's
Now let's look at all the stuff we got. Ooh, got some snow globe, checkbook, staplers, a human heart, and some pens. Alright, I'm gonna steal. I don't know.
We should do a few different scary ways to say Putin too in Russia.
Putin, Russia. Putin, Russia. Putin, Russia. This is your life.